Hi everyone. Before we get into today's episode, I have a little announcement to make. Some of you guys may have seen on the 9016 Instagram story a couple of days ago, I posted a wee poll asking if you guys use Discord, and a lot of you said yes, and a lot of you at least said you were interested in some sort of online chat room based around the podcast and art and music and that sort of thing. So I've gone ahead and set one up. I thought it'd be a really cool tool to have just for me as the podcast host, just to sort of get some feedback from you guys, what you do and don't like about the episode, guests that you want to see, things like that, and also just made some categories there for specifically having online chat rooms about art and music. So I've made some sort of subcategories there. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's essentially an online chat room. So what you'll be able to do if you follow the link in the 9016 Instagram page bio, you'll see the link there to the Discord. And all you have to do is click that link and should just open up. If you already have the Discord app, should just take you directly to the page and you just accept the invite. Otherwise, it'll prompt you to whatever app store your phone uses to download the app, and you can go from there. You just have to sign up with a name and password. You don't even have to make a server of your own. You can just join our 9016 server and just be a part of that community. Hopefully, it's going to be really fun for everyone to just get involved and share music and art and that sort of thing, and just create an online community of that nature. So yeah, if you're interested, check out that link. It'd be really cool to see you guys online. I've also set up a video chat room, so sort of a public chat room for anyone to sort of get involved via video and audio, and there are audio only chat rooms as well, which we can definitely set up if people are interested in that sort of thing, but also just creating a space to converse with people online, and not the typical ways that we sort of do, just to have a community chat room that you can join or leave at any time, and we'll probably post topics just around art or music or the podcast or whatever, just for everyone to discuss, and we could potentially use this chat room audio as an episode of the podcast. So it'd be cool to see what sort of ideas come out and what you guys like about the platform if you do choose to use it. But thanks for listening. Otherwise, here is my episode with Ngaio Woods. Hope you guys enjoy.
Home Audio Entertainment.
9016 Radio.
The show for artists of all kinds.
Sit down, relax, enjoy the music.
Okay, Luna, it's your turn.
So essentially spiders have muscles that bring their legs back. So if you imagine when you see a dead spider, they're all crumpled up with their legs. And have you ever seen a dead spider?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially they have muscles that bring the legs back, but then to extend the legs, they essentially have fluid within their thorax and they pump it out really fast in their legs, which creates pressure in their leg, which springs it out so it goes straight.
Is this typical of an exoskeleton?
I don't actually know if it's in all insects. I only read this about spiders, so unsure as how they do it. I think beetles might be different. I think they're mussels, and I know that because I also did a project on beetle cyborgs, which is very cool, and I want to tell you about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But, do you want to wear the headphones on now?
Yeah.
Cool. And that's maybe just... Feel free to move that around, just whatever's comfortable for you. If you want to lean back to it,
that's fine. Yeah.
It's super
invasive.
Yeah,
that's fine. So basically, the legs have muscles that bring them in close to their body, and then to shoot them out, they put force pressurized fluid into their legs, which makes them spring out straight.
Sorry, are you hearing anything?
I can hear myself.
I've put my headphones in the wrong thing.
Yeah.
There we go. Now I can hear. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, now I can hear you too. Cool. So it puts pressurized fluid into the legs, which makes them spring out straight, which is an innate thing in the spider, so it doesn't have to think about it. So essentially, just movement is pushing fluid out to extend, and then muscles contracting and fluid coming back in to retract. So that's how they walk, and that's why they walk kind of, mechanically.
So the fluid coming out retracts as well, or do they already have that ability to retract it?
So the fluid, it's like an automatic thing in their body. They don't have to do it. It just sort of depressurizes,
right.
I guess. So some of the fluid will, I would assume, kind of come back into the body and then just pushes out. Oh. What's sick is that that's how jumping spiders jump. So essentially they force really quickly a whole bunch of fluid into their back two sets of legs. So everything's crumpled up, and then it's just a massive chute of fluid so that the legs just extend, and then they just bounce off and bound.
That's crazy.
Really high.
And that happens so quickly, obviously.
So fast, yeah. So real.
That's crazy, because spiders, jumping spiders in particular, I wonder if it's due to their size or whether this principle that you're explaining, that they are able to like send themselves, like the amount of distance a jumping spider can travel from that one little burst is like insane, like compared
huge.
to how far a human would move in that like same.
Well, I can't remember like the exact amount of football fields, but it was something ridiculous. Like if they were the size of a human, it would be like 50
It's crazy.
football fields, which is insane. Crazy. But the reason why I think that it's not the same in beetles is because I'm pretty sure they have like although they must have hemolymph because they're also insects, but they have muscles because I learnt about cyborg beetles, and to control that you have to control muscle spasms, like in humans. So like, you know how to get a muscle to contract, you send like an electrical impulse from your brain, which causes the muscle to contract and then it, like relax. It's the same principle, except beetles in particular are like a lot more like simplified, I guess, than humans. There's like less muscles, or at least less muscles that are involved in like in their gait, so like in their walking. And they figured out that by putting like a little backpack, and forgive me because I don't know the right terminology for electronics because I'm not very good at electronics, but essentially it was like a little circuitry board on their back that could send little electrical impulses down little wires or little electrodes. And these electrical impulses were like controlled by like radio waves, so it was all remote control. So essentially they would send electrical impulses to like the muscles in their legs, and then by stimulating one muscle and then the other, like in like different patterns and different orders, you could get the legs to like move and to kind of walk like a little robot beetle. And then they figured out by doing like different patterns and different speeds, you could change up the styles of walking, so they could get the beetles to like walk, get them to gallop, and then you could get them to like bound essentially, which is weird to see a beetle do, but it was crazy. It's like these scientists in Singapore who figured all this out. And they also, which I think is cooler, they figured out that the mechanics that make a beetle fly is pretty much just as simple.
Yeah, right.
So to get the beetle to like turn its wings on and off was a little bit more complicated. They had to put like little electrodes, so like the little wires into, it's like a little part of the brain just behind the optic lobe, which is sort of behind the eyes. And they figured out that by doing like little sort of consecutive pulses of like 10 milliseconds or something, it would cause them to start beating their wings rapidly. And then they figured out that if they did a sustained pulse after that, they could stop. So you could now like toggle the insect on and off. And then they figured out that while it was in flight, if you sort of did like, I don't know what they did like specifically, but it was like they changed the speed up on and off, or they sort of alternated doing little pulses and then sustained pulse, and you could change like the thrust. So you now had like, you could turn it on and off, and then you could change up the speed. And then they figured out that if you put electrodes into the flight muscles on either side, essentially if you put more like little pulses into one side and make one wing speed up and the other wing not as fast, you're going to turn to the left or the right. So now you can change up like direction. So you essentially have full control over this insect's flight, and they wanted to use it for like search and rescue and like I don't know, you could do like avalanches or earthquakes, something like that, because they're small enough, so if they're, you know, flying around these really unstable structures, they're not going to cause another slip. And sorry if I'm just going to talk for
No, please, I love this. This is really fascinating.
They figured out, because these beetles that they're using are like, they're not Goliath beetles, but they're a close relation, so they're quite big. And they can attach little thermosensors to them. So essentially you can have someone controlling the beetle with like the thermosensor sort of input on their like iPad or something, so they can see what the beetle's seeing. And because obviously humans are warm, if they're trapped underneath things, the sensor will pick it up. So they can essentially find if there was a trapped human underneath some rubble, the insect would fly around, can crawl around and stuff, and pick up where these people are, and then humans can kind of go about trying to figure out how to extract them.
Oh my God.
Which is fucking cool.
Yeah, but, that's crazy. Is it, so in this case, like, are they? Is this like a logistical option, or is this something that they've found is capable within this insect? Like, surely there could be some sort of drone system that would detect heat in the same way, or is this just sort of the novelty of being able to do this with the insects?
I mean, it's sort of both, yeah, because I sort of thought about that too. I guess with drones, well, one, there's restrictions on drones, although I think you could probably use them for earthquakes and stuff. I'm sure they're allowed for that. But one, it's way less expensive.
Sure.
Also, a beetle's flight, so you're controlling how, like, the direction and stuff that the beetle flies, but the beetle is still in control of its body. So it has the advantage of, millions of years of evolved flight. So essentially, like, because they do have micro flying robots as well, but the problem with them is that they don't have the innate ability to correct when there's like wind or like a change in air currents or something like that. Like they just completely flop essentially if anything in the atmosphere changes. Whereas insects have, learned to adapt like in mid-flight to any kind of change in the atmosphere or anything like that. So I guess it has that advantage. Drones also have, a battery life, I guess, so they can't go for as longer, whereas a beetle can sustain flight for like a really long amount of time. I remember reading the paper about it, and I can't give you numbers, unfortunately, but I remember it was saying that it was a lot longer than like drones and stuff.
So if you are using the insect in this context, this may have been a point you've already said, but I may have just missed it. But like, how is that controlled? Like, how are they making the insect do this?
Do these things? Okay, so essentially, yeah. So like the little backpack on the back is controlled by remote control. In this experiment, they
are attaching a unit of some kind to the thing.
Yeah, it's glued down with beeswax.
Okay.
Yeah, so environmentally friendly glue.
right. And relative to
in the insect realm. But so they actually used a Wii remote for this example because this is just what they had. But which I think is brilliant. But anyway, so it's like a little circuitry board that's glued there with little tiny wires that come out, and they come from the pack, and they sort of, what's the word? They like terminate directly into the insect's muscles.
Okay.
So when like, that like electrotherapy stuff, if you put like, you can like make muscles spasm by sending little shockwaves into things.
Yeah.
Essentially the same thing. So like your brain controls the spasming of your muscles, so the contracting and releasing by electrical impulses. So essentially by just having a little pack and a little like wire directly into the muscle, you just bypass the brain.
Yeah, right.
So they're just controlling the muscles of the animal, bypassing the brain entirely. And if you do it in like the right sequence, then, if you say you're lifting your arm, it takes various different muscles and then different muscles in different orders. So if you like stimulate, your shoulder muscle. I'm bad at human anatomy.
It's fine.
But if you stimulate your shoulder muscle and then you stimulate, say, like your bicep, tricep?
Yeah. Bicep, tricep.
Like in a particular order, you're going to get a movement of lifting your arm up and down.
Sure.
Which is the exact same thing with these insects. So essentially by doing each muscle in the leg, they could and then doing it in a specific order, they could get it to move. But the flight muscles is actually really simple because there's not actually like that many muscles involved. So like I was saying before, like beetles have evolved flight for millions of years, so have a lot of insects. And so in order to get these, especially these big beetles off the ground, it's going to take a lot of energy. So you have to have a method that gives you a lot of movement with a small amount of energy use. So it's a lot easier to describe this visually, so I'll try my best to do it vocally. But
just for those listening, in case you haven't already sort of figured out what it is we're talking about, we started off talking about pistons and hydraulics, and that's translated us into insects and how insect body parts work and how what do you call this practice that we're talking about now?
I mean, I don't know if it has like an overall term, but this was just beetle cyborgs.
Yeah, beetle cyborgs, right? Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the way a beetle flies, this is also how flies fly, is you essentially have two parts of the thorax. So if you imagine like two semicircles held over one over the other. Tell me if this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And then you jam two little wings in between the semicircles. All right? So that's the two halves of the thorax. And then essentially to create like a downward stroke, the insect will contract the thorax which deforms it and pushes it down, which jams the wings downward, right? So that creates that downward thrust. And then when
the wings are protruding in this context of the two semicircles. Yeah, right.
So it's like it's kind of like a sandwich, like a wing sandwich.
Yeah, right. So they're sticking out, they're being compressed, the wings are either
So essentially just by using little muscles to contract and like compress the thorax, you're jamming the wings downward, which is like, you know, where the main power, I guess, from lift comes from. So it's like a tiny little movement for a big effect.
Sure.
And then when you relax the thorax, the wings will then return back. And there's like, with a little bit of help of muscles, kind of like will flap up a little bit. So essentially just by like contracting the thorax up and down repetitively, you get flapping of wings.
Right.
So they can use a tiny amount of energy to sustain themselves in the air for ages with like a lot of movement, which is great if you're wanting to control flight, because essentially you just need to control like two muscles.
Right.
So if you can put an electrode directly into the muscles that deform the thorax, you can essentially control the ability to fly. And then there are other different like little specific muscles that do help, but that's like the main gist of it. And so there's like flight muscles kind of on either side of the thorax, and that's the one that you would control if you wanted to like speed up one side and then slow down the other side so that you can turn and stuff.
Right. And does this have to be done because the insect is so tiny and those wings are moving like super, super fast, right? Like how do you control it? Is it just the machine sort of like sets a pace for how quickly that is expanding and contracting? And then like when it comes to turning, like how vigilant, I suppose, do you have to be in that sort of control? Are you that deep in the knowledge base to answer that?
So they have only done it on these big Goliath beetles for kind of that reason, because they're quite big. Like they're kind of the size of your fist.
Yikes.
Like they're big beetles.
Yeah.
They don't really have to. I've misinformed a little bit. So they don't have to like
control every
aspect. They're not controlling every flap of the wing. Essentially,
they're just finding the pattern that's the brain is sort of giving in.
Yeah, they kind of just they turn on the flying, and the insect does the flying by itself.
Right.
But then by controlling the muscles on either side, they can then just make one slightly faster than the other to turn in.
Okay.
So you don't have to like create a pattern that maintains flight for the insect. The insect will maintain its own flight, and you're just kind of controlling direction and speed and on and off.
Crazy.
Yeah, which is why it's better than the robots and stuff, because essentially that's what I mean. Like they can keep themselves in the air because they're in control. They can adjust for different wind speeds and stuff like that. Whereas it's a lot harder for a robot to do that because you have to control every aspect.
Yeah, right. That's so crazy. And working on such a small scale too, I imagine is quite tedious.
Pretty hectic.
Yeah. And you say this practice is a cheaper procedure than like a drone scenario if you're sort of comparing the two.
Yeah.
So there's, I always picture like things that are on such a small scale to be in very expensive.
To be hard. I mean, I think if they were to like, it's a pretty primitive stage at the moment. So maybe going forward, it might get a little bit more pricey. But at the moment, it's some random guys in Singapore in like this big room with paper on the walls, throwing insects into the air and trying to control them with a Wii remote. So it's
That's
like
so
they're kind of using what they've got.
Of all things, shout out Nintendo. That's so funny.
But yeah, which is kind of crack up. But for the assignment that I was doing, we sort of had to think about like other aspects you could use them for, and it would be very cool to use it to study one, like beetle behavior, but also like other animal behavior, because they're a lot less invasive. You know, a drone's quite noisy and it's like a foreign object. Yeah. Most animals don't really know what it is and they're going to be scared of it. Whereas a big beetle isn't really going to scare that many people, you know?
Yeah, makes sense. It's
cool.
something that's already sort of existing. It's not some newfound, like, what the heck is that flying around?
Exactly, yeah.
Makes sense.
Like I don't know why you'd want to look at deer, but a deer would be like, oh, look, a beetle.
Yeah, sure.
That's
that
normal.
makes sense. Not much of a head turner. Yeah, that's so true. But, I mean, if it's a beetle that's the size of your fist, like, to a human, you'd probably still scare someone. Yeah. But I suppose in the context of what they're using these things for, it's not sort of really relevant.
But I mean, like, you could theoretically use them as, like, spy beetles. That was kind of the worry of these scientists. They were like, we could see how it would be used in like the army, or something like that. Like, we don't want it to be used for that. We want it to be peaceful.
But
but I'm sure someone would use it.
Absolutely. Anything can be weaponized, right? That's sort of the scary part about these practices. It's like, how can we turn this technology into something that's going to benefit this corporation, typically the army in these cases, which is always a worry. And there's usually tons of money involved, and often, like, I don't know, it depends on your true passion, I suppose, will like pan out what's going to happen with it. Like, if you're something that's really passionate about and you're really like set on having it to serve this particular purpose, or, you know, not be in the context of war or whatever it's going to be used for, then you'll be able to say no to probably the millions of dollars that you're going to get offered from something like the US Army. You know, it's crazy.
And that's the unfortunate thing, is like with a lot of science endeavors, is that you need funding. And if you're creating something that then could be used for the army, you know, there's going to be a lot of funding coming from that. And I guess, I mean, I've obviously never had this situation, and I'm sure people, you know, in the science realm will have to make that decision at some point, where it's like whether the science itself is important enough to take money from, you know, from armies and things, which are going to theoretically or potentially weaponize whatever you're doing. But if it's like the greater good, you know, then it's hard. It's
tricky. I feel like there's already enough there to really, I don't know too much about like what the army does and what they really need, but, you know, it seems like, how much do we really need to have? It seems like they're just sort of working up a back catalogue, so to speak, of things that could potentially be used rather than actually doing stuff. But there's probably so many insider things going on that they might need something for we'd never even know about, you know?
Yeah, and like this is the problem, right? Because at the moment, everyone has like crazy weapons, right? Everyone has these big missiles and stuff. So it's like, what's even the point in continuing to create things? Because we're kind of, I mean, this is sort of the big first world countries, essentially, because like obviously there's a lot of wars and things going on at the moment, and I don't want to belittle that by saying this, but everyone's kind of at a standstill all the time, because like, you know, if America and Russia went to war, that's fucking the end of the planet, really. Like, there's enough explosives in both places to just completely blow the earth off the I was gonna say the face of the planet, but face of the galaxy.
And my uneducated brain, I suppose, like what I'm about to say here doesn't come from any place of knowledge. This is just what my perception of what happens is here, is that it's just taking things under your belt, you being like an army of any given country, to have in case something arises. You know, it's not like we're at war and we need this. Granted, there is wars going on in smaller scales, but it's like, oh, if we have this, then we have the advantage if something ever props up in this case, you know, like
it's all about like advantage on paper.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like or, you know, to even just say that like we have this thing, like you don't have this, we have this. Don't try come at us because we've got this thing, you know. It's sort of like just reassuring yourself or like the country that, you know, they're going to be okay if anyone does choose to, because you don't know like what else is going on outside of your country for the most part, at least as a citizen. You're like, but someone could sporadically be like, oh, well, they've done this, we're going to attack, you know, and then you've got something else that you, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess everyone's striving.
It's kind of scary that the things are like that are probably going on that we just have no clue about what's happening. Right?
I mean, it's just like, there's just so many things to worry about at the moment. So it's kind of like, take your pick, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It is funny. This going back to like the insect biology side of things. This is obviously something you're very passionate about and something that you've studied, obviously. Something we were talking about before we started was the importance of just education and being excited about learning the things that you want to learn about, right? Like you're probably not going to learn as much from someone that's not as enthusiastic about what they learn. I sort of just wanted to develop on that. So like in your experience, is it sort of your own excitement that has brought you to sort of further your knowledge, or has there been someone sort of in your study that has sort of excited you about these sorts of things?
Honestly, I kind of just come from myself. Like, I've definitely had people who have influenced me for sure. But when I was little, I like very much liked insects and animals and stuff, and I wanted to just sort of travel around and like tell people about them. That was what I wanted to do, and I thought that meant that was zoology. So then coming to university, I thought I was like really lucky. I was like, man, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Like my sister at the time was very stressed. Like she didn't really know what she wanted to do, where she wanted to go. And I was like, man, that's rough. Like having no idea where you want to go. So I did zoology and I was like, haha, yes, found my calling until it came to assignments. And am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
They fucking suck. They were so shit. I'm sorry if anyone from zoology ever is listening, but they were awful. Like the lectures themselves, really interesting. So interesting. Like animal behavior. Oh my God. One of the most interesting things in the world. But all of the assignments were just like research based projects. So it was just like prepping to be in a lab for the rest of your life, researching, I don't know, like vestigial wings in fruit flies.
Right.
Or something, which is, if anyone doesn't know vestigial wings, they're like useless wings.
Right. Like a penguin or something.
Yeah, essentially. And so I hated that aspect, and as much as I loved the content, I didn't like the research. So when I finished at uni, I was just like, fuck. Like, I have no idea what I want to do. Like I don't want to be in a lab for the rest of my life. And so then I went on this sort of like 2-year spiral into the depths of despair.
Yeah.
And then I was talking to my friend Zoe, and I was like, man, all I want to do is just go around and tell people about animals and tell people about insects and about science and about cool shit. And she was like, why don't you do science communication? And I was like, huh, interesting. And I looked into it, and it's been really, really cool and really interesting. And you learn so much about like different audiences and, you know, like when I started doing science communication, I kind of had this idea that the majority of the world didn't really care about science. Like they weren't really that interested in it. But there's been like heaps of surveys that people, they think it's cool. Like people are interested, and it's completely down to how it is communicated essentially. And so learning about like the importance of communication in general, but science especially is a really tricky one because it sort of like intertwines with different things, intertwines with like politics and stuff, and it can sometimes intertwine with like, or you know, go against some like religion and things like that. So it's like a tricky place, and people often perceive it in like to a somewhat negative degree, but it doesn't have to be, because science in its, you know, natural form and in its most basic form is not entwined in politics, and it's not against religion or anything like that. It's simply like the art of discovery and learning essentially. Like, you know, it's essentially going out, not understanding something and wanting to understand it better, and, you know, doing research and testing things over and over and over again. And that's what makes it, you know, so interesting and so reliable, is that in science, you know, scientists claim that they'll know something 100%, but science never claims anything. It never claims anything 100%. But it doesn't mean to say it's not reliable, because basically when something is theorized, you have a theory and then someone will test it, and then it will be peer reviewed, and then it'll be tested over and over and over and over again until you're pretty much sure that that's exactly what it is. And then it becomes reliable in that sense. Whereas other forms of knowledge, and no hatred towards religion, for example, but in a religious story or something like that, you know, it's like something is said a certain way, and that's how it is, and that's 100% fact to that person. Like that's the truth. It's never like questioned or proven with like empirical evidence over and over and over again. So people can sort of argue whether that's reliable or not, but science is always questioned.
Yeah.
Which somehow makes it less questionable. Like it's, you know, you see what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. There's quite a key difference between what a religion is and how science compares, I suppose, because the whole concept around a religion is someone goes, this is what I think is the truth, or what I know to be the truth, and people agree and come on board with this idea, and it gets spread, and that idea gets taught and expanded to the masses, whereas science is sort of ever developing. It's not like I don't think any scientists probably want to say that this is what happened, you know.
Yeah, well, you'd be a bad scientist.
Yeah, this is the concept. This is my theory.
it's
This is like,
constantly
how can
moving
we
forward.
like develop this and find out some of the truth. So it's quite different, but like, you know, I'm just sort of trying to segregate like the two, not to say that they're not comparable, but you know, that's sort of where the difference lies and how you sort of like have an open-minded, closed-minded sort of tier of people, I suppose.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, like science, in a way, it could be looked at as sort of a religion, but I don't really like to look at it like that. I think it should be a separate entity so that anyone from any background or any beliefs could still involve themselves in science and it wouldn't come across, you know, it wouldn't negate their beliefs at all or anything like that. But yeah, like essentially, yeah, religion is providing ideas and answers, and if that works with your way of life or your way of thinking, then like that's super great. But you're right, science is, if you were to say that, you know, as much as I love evolution is super dear to me. It's great, and I think I'm pretty sure that's how things happened. Like I don't have any other better theories to go with it, but you know, every scientist should be happy that if someone comes up with an ulterior idea and it gets proven more times than evolution, then we should, you know, the whole like basis of science is that then we'd all go, oh, sick, okay, this is how it worked then, and you just leave that one behind.
Sure.
Like that's why science keeps moving forward. That's why you get new technologies and new ideas and discover all these different things. That's why we know about spider hydraulics. Yeah, right. And all that shit is because people keep questioning things and keep learning, and that's really cool, and I get really excited about that, and I want people to want to know about it. And honestly, even if they don't want to know about science, just like having that kind of mindset to keep questioning things and keep like looking into stuff and you know, finding answers for your own, like for yourself about things. Like I think that's just like a good,
I guess that's
like,
one comparable
have.
side about science and religion is that religion typically has sort of a belief in a greater power, or you know, there's sort of like a reason for all things is due to a soul being or entity or whatever it is. So your belief system is based around this thing that has put these things in place for you, and things are the way that they are because of this thing. Whereas science is similar in that aspect, but it's kind of like you're finding out what the answer, quote unquote, is to why these things are the way they are, and that's usually around a factual thing, or like obviously evidence based, and sort of developing what we have in front of us and sort of backtracing, I suppose, to what that answer is. And that's sort of the belief system in itself, is to think like, okay, well, what is the like if you were to scale science to its biggest thing, like involving space and sort of, you know, the Big Bang Theory, how we all came to be, it's sort of a similar channel. Like if we know sort of how the planet that we live on came to be, then that's sort of like a belief system in itself, you know. It's like, okay, well, I know where I stand and where I come from in this sort of like grand scheme of life, you know, so that's a belief system itself too. So I guess that's sort of the comparison, but science just has that interesting like
it's
tidbits in everything.
Yeah, and it's just chaos.
Yeah.
Like the cool thing about, like, I think what attracts me to it is all other sort of ideas, theories, beliefs of how the world came to be, involving, like, including religions and stuff, is everyone tries to sort of neatly package it up. Like, I think a lot of people looked at the world and was like, this is confusing, I don't understand how things came, and like, and obviously this is coming from a science mind, so forgive me, any religious people out there. Anyway, it's essentially that, you know, it's been wrapped up in a nice package. They've sort of gone like, we don't understand this doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. It makes sense to have an entity that was in control of these things and created these things, because that's kind of like human nature. We tend to sort of want to understand things, want to have control over our sort of area and our life and stuff like that. So it's comforting to think that there is an entity that we can relate to that is essentially doing the same thing, but with us, like where it's home kind of thing. So, and obviously there's billions of different religions and it's all sort of different, but to the small amount that I understand of religions, it does seem to be like this. They want it to be nicely packaged and understandable and there to be like a nice end. Now, with science, this can either be a downfall for you or attraction. But the more you learn about science, the more you realize that everything is just absolutely chaotic and without any meaning or structure. Like, evolution in itself is often depicted as like this really clean, method of creating stronger and entities that will survive better. The whole survival of the fittest. Not always true. Like, there's a lot of random shit out there that does not work as well as it could be. Pandas, giant pandas, useless. Very cute, useless. I remember reading a thing, I can't remember like the distance, but it's a pathetic amount of distance. But essentially, if you put like a little grove of bamboo in one area and then a grove in another one, they'll die before they get to the next grove because their stomachs are not like evolved well to handle bamboo because they're bears.
Oh my God.
Like, that's the thing. Evolution is not an entity. And if it was, it would be a dick. Like, it's not looking out for you. It's kind of just doing its own thing.
Yeah, right.
Essentially, like, so for anyone who doesn't actually know evolution or natural selection, essentially it's like the process. You'll have a population and there'll be a lot of like restricting factors around and stuff. And there'll be a mutation that will happen that will cause a change in like physiology or behavior or something like that. And if that is beneficial to that individual over what other individuals in that population have, it'll be selected for, meaning that individual will mate easier or mate more. And essentially over time, that trait will then be expressed more and will sort of overtake the previous one. And then you have essentially a fitter, population.
Yeah.
But there are other players at work. Like, there's sexual selection. Sexual selection is one of my all-time favorite things in the world because it's just it's ridiculous. It's absolutely chaos. So if you think of like a peacock, for example, right? Big, beautiful feathers. So natural selection is for the interest of fitness and breeding. Sexual selection is essentially just for breeding, just for sex. Right. So it gives zero shits about the predators that are out there. So if it's like, this peacock will get more, babes. If it has a big tail, it's going to have a big tail.
Yeah,
We're going
right.
to select for that tail because that means more babes. And if it can mate, it doesn't matter if it gets eaten by a wolf 10 seconds after, it mated. And that's the main point. So it's going to keep getting, selecting for larger and larger feathers. And the only thing that constrains that is natural selection, is then being like, okay, the feathers are so big now that when it tries to run, it gets caught on absolutely everything and gets eaten. So it's not going to have sex. But you have individuals out there who have, ridiculous traits that make it very visible to predators or very slow or all sorts of things. But if the hindrance doesn't show up until after breeding, it doesn't matter. Right. Because evolution's interest is in you breeding. It doesn't give a fuck about you.
Yeah, right.
And I shouldn't be talking it in like an anthropomorphic
I know what word you're trying to say.
Anthropomorphic, like, standpoint, because it's not an entity and it doesn't make decisions. But it's kind of fun, I guess, to think about it like that.
Yeah. Well, that's how you sort of excite people about learning about it as well. You know, I guess as long as you can disclaim the fact that that's not sort of a soul body making a decision, but like you sort of relate it to the people that are listening. Like, I'm already sort of more engaged just because you're and you're excited about it, so I'm excited about it, and it's just
and it's one of the best characters because it's like a Loki. It's like an anti-villain.
Yeah, right.
Or anti-hero. Anti-hero, not anti-villain. That's just a hero. But so it's just like a crazy combination of a lot of things, and that's why you have some really and that's what gives us like really like beautiful paradise birds, or like all these hectic beetles with giant noses and deer with big antlers and all this crazy behavior. It's just like a fight between sexual selection and natural selection and all these sort of things. But yeah, evolution definitely makes mistakes, as in like the pandas and stuff. But one of the things that I love to think about, which always makes me really excited, is the idea, because it's easy to think like, oh yeah, an eyeball evolved, or lungs evolved, or flight evolved. But the problem is, in order for something to be selected, it has to be of benefit every single population. So when you think of flight, having half a wing is not going to be useful, right? So how the fuck did it evolve? Like, how did you get to that point? How did you go from little arms to soaring in the sky? And it's the most interesting thing. And you know, I'd love to talk to you about eyes and lungs, but I just don't have that much knowledge about those. But feathers is a really good example, because essentially, like, every intermediate stage has to have benefits. So they started out as scales back in the dinosaur times. I don't know if anyone else has seen this or heard this new information that dinosaurs were feathered.
Yeah, I saw something about that recently. Just I didn't dive too much into it, but yeah, there was something
very
heavily
cool.
involved around that.
Which is really, really interesting information. So essentially, they know they came from scales because they figured out that there is a I've lost the word, but essentially like a sleeping form in like crocodiles and alligators.
Right.
Alligators and crocodiles, probably both, I would assume. But essentially, they can wake it up, and I'm using bad terms because I've forgotten the words, but they can wake up the gene in the crocodiles, and it creates this sort of almost like a quill, like it becomes this pointed scale. So they know that it's stemmed from that because obviously they still have that that gene.
Right.
But essentially, they started becoming these little pointy quills, and then obviously nothing can happen without some sort of benefit or reason. So they think that the little quill-shaped feathers, like, were for like heat retention and sort of distribution, or like to either keep a layer of warmer air closer to their bodies, like a wetsuit, or to keep a colder layer close to them so it wouldn't get so hot. Then slowly over time, those would have been selected for and would have got longer and slightly branched. And then they thought that those were for, I think they were for shade. They thought for shading young, because they found a fossil of like a early winged dinosaur with like its wing over its nest, shielding eggs. So like shielding eggs from like the heat and stuff. And then also still for like the heat distribution and things like that. And then as they branched out a little bit more and they gained pigment, they thought that might have been for sexual selection, for like displays like you see in paradise birds and stuff like that. And then slowly over time, each intermediate form, you know, of benefit to whatever the animal's needs were. No, that makes it sound like it was for the animal's needs. Happened to benefit and then thus be selected for.
Sure.
They got to like more closer to the forms we have now, where there's like a lot of branched, kind of fluffy. And then they realized that helped, well, they theorized rather, that helped with running. So essentially, if you put little paper bits stuck to your arms and you run really fast and kind of flap your arms a bit, you get propelled just a little bit faster. And if you're just that tiny much faster than the guy next to you who doesn't have the bits of paper stuck to his arms, he's going to get eaten and you're not. And you'll survive and you'll breed and that'll be passed down.
Sure. And
then as they got slightly bigger and longer and you know, arm muscles got a little bit more tuned to sort of flapping, they figured out that meant these dinosaurs could sort of leap off hills and kind of flap a bit and get a bit more height. They could jump higher. They thought that might be useful for like evading predators up trees. So if you can like jump and flap and then grab onto a tree and run up, you can avoid. And then that went to gliding, and then gliding longer and longer distances. And then eventually over time, you know, one of them will be gliding and then they'll have a muscle that's slightly better than someone else and they can flap just that one more time, which gets them out of the reach of like a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something. No. I'm not sure if they're around the same time. I don't really know history very well, sorry. You know, and then they'll survive and then that'll be passed down and then eventually they get to the point where they can flap their arms and you have, you know, albatross with fucking enormous wingspans that can glide for ever essentially and all this amazing stuff.
That's crazy. That's quite the insight. What I constantly was thinking about during all of that was even the start of something that envelops, that creates a like you're talking about the scales becoming something that turns into feathers. Like, do we have an explanation for how that even starts? Like, how does one individual somehow have this part of their DNA written that creates this newer thing that becomes something that develops via natural selection or sexual selection? Like, do we know how that comes to be? Like, what was...
I mean, yeah,
That's crazy.
And when you start to think on that level, that's where I think it's so amazing. Because you're right, like, this is a very slow process, and everything, it takes a lot for something just to completely transform. Like, you could have a relatively drastic mutation. Maybe it went from completely flat sort of crocodile scales to a way more pointed one in a couple, in a generation. I'm not sure. Or, it was a very slow, like one crocodile or something had like slightly more slender, and then each generation it became a little bit more. But in order for that to happen, there had to be reason for that. There had to be benefit.
I suppose you'll be able to confirm or deny this, but I suppose it's just the genetic makeup of two individuals. Like, it's not always going to make a perfect match, right? Because they sort of get meshed and mushed and made into a new strand or whatever. So is it sort of inevitable, I suppose, that there's going to be some inconsistencies that would create something new in the next being? But this is happening over years and years and years and years. Obviously, evolution goes on for ages. So,
although I was like, I have a terrible memory for scientists' names, which is bad. But I was reading a paper. Someone Gould. I'm not sure. Anyway, he sort of theorized and kind of proved that sometimes it is over a really lengthy amount of time, but sometimes it does happen quite rapidly. But yeah, essentially when you're combining two, I haven't done cells in such a long time. I think, when you're combining two zygotes, to like an egg and a sperm, and combining DNA and stuff, most of the time it works out pretty well. But yeah, it's pretty relatively easy for there to be an inconsistency or a mutation or something, and that can be as small as eye color, or it can be as big as like missing an arm or something, or all sorts of things. So yeah,
it's so,
I mean, this is where it exceeds me, but this is where my sort of excitement comes from.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely. Trying to find those answers is super fascinating, and I just it's funny how quickly, like we're saying, some things can happen so quickly. Some things can take hundreds of years to sort of develop. I don't know. One thing I sort of immediately think of is something that would sort of create a rapid change is within humans. If you have a mixed race couple that mate and have offspring, that offspring's going to be sort of immediately a mix of those two, right? Like, are we quite unique in our diversity as humans compared to the animal world? Like, how could you sort of say within one species, is there sort of major differences like what we have, just in terms of, I suppose, appearance?
Yeah, so this
if
is
that's
like,
something you can answer.
Kinda. So like, it's the same with dogs and having different breeds. Race and breeds is slightly different to species.
Right.
So humans are one species, but there's variation within species. So definitely animals do have that. And another example of like drastic change is sort of interspecies. I was going to say interspecies relationships. I don't really have relationships, but
Mating.
Mating. And then you can sometimes it creates. So either the egg won't be fertilized, won't work, or an offspring will be created, but it won't be able to breed. But every now and then, species will merge again. Sometimes they split apart, they diverge, you get two new species. Sometimes they come back together. Sometimes species that were diverged for a long time will come back together, and you can get this like sort of rapid diversity, how you would if you had two races mixed, and you're going to get a mixed child, or if you had a pug and a Chihuahua.
Yeah, right.
You'd actually, I don't know. I mean, I guess that would work. I'm not really sure. Pugs are kind of a hard one because they've been, affected by human breeding quite extensively.
They're not quite an ideal breed of dog, are they? Like in terms of their facial structure.
Yeah. Did you know if you take actually this might be a lie, but I'm going to say anyway. I heard that if you take pugs on airplanes, you can't take pugs on airplanes because their eyes pop out.
Oh.
Yeah, because they're already so like big and
they have a lot of trouble.
It's not funny, sorry.
No,
really
but
morbid.
I don't know. There's humour involved in it still, but yes, obviously that's why they've implemented that rule. But like pugs also have a problem with their breathing, right? Like their face is so squished.
Yeah,
it
fucked up all their airways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, what a nightmare.
Yeah, no, dogs. it's funny, right? Because we love dogs so much. Humans love them. They're such an important, aspect to our world. I think a lot of people would be very, very depressed if we didn't have dogs. But in saying that, we've caused a decent amount of suffering in those guys in terms of breeding. Like, bulldogs, fucking hell. They're not doing well. They're not doing well.
It's the same sort of issues?
Same sort, yeah, breathing, skin fold infections. It's like those, the rolly dogs. Yeah, nightmares to look after because you have to keep cleaning all the folds. Otherwise they get infection because normally, in the natural world, they wouldn't have all those folds, so they didn't have to do that. I always think it's funny because like there's a couple of breeds of cats which are a little bit problematic, but for the most part, cats are just cats. Like it's just stayed that same way for like hundreds and like thousands of years. And I think it's cracker. I saw like a joke, and it's like dog breeders are like, oh, what type of dog is that? And it's like, oh, it's a Dutch poodle, blah blah blah, some long breed. And then your cat is like, oh, it's an orange cat.
That's so true, right? Because you don't really like. That's really all the differences are between cats. It's just their fur color, except for I suppose. What are those skinless cats called?
You mean the furless cats?
Furless
that
cats.
That is a dead cat, my friend.
Yes, sorry, furless cats. What are they called? They have a name. I want to say Siamese, but that's not right.
Are they just furless cats? I mean, they'll have a specific name. I don't know.
We know what we're talking about, but like,
they're the furless cats.
Where did that come from? Like, how?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if that was a human bred thing or if. I was going to say somewhere in like warm climate, but then they'd probably get sunburned.
That makes sense, but it doesn't seem like there's an environment where that is sort of
ideal. Yeah. Because like a desert cat still has fur because it needs to like protect itself from the sun, I guess. I don't know. Just a fun little fact that I found out about cats. So essentially, like, how if you're betrayed as a human, I've forgotten the words, I'm going to have to explain it. When you're betrayed as a human, you'll feel like remorse for that person and you kind of like hold a grudge. So us and one other animal is the only animal that does that, and it's domestic cats.
Right.
So not even wild cats. Wild cats, if they're like cat friends or partners or whatever, like screw them over or piss them off or something, they won't hold a grudge. Dogs don't hold a grudge. Other animals don't, but domestic cats do.
Right.
They're the only ones. So you can literally be dead to a cat.
So how do we measure that? Like, how do we say that is a thing? Is it just behavioral? Like,
I'm assuming it was behavioral. Yeah,
because cats are pretty, sassy for the most part, right?
100%. Yeah, I don't actually know where it came from. It was probably just a random fact that I heard. So take it with a grain of salt. But I would assume that it was based on watching a group of cats interact, and essentially, if a cat has a fight with another cat, those cats just won't ever talk to each other again, won't even interact ever again. Because like it's interesting, because it's obviously beneficial to make up. If you're a wolf and you fought with another wolf, when your like dinner essentially relies on your pack working together cohesively in order to get that meal, you can't have this sort of grudge for each other. Grudge is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Like, can't, secretly hate fucking Joe over there because he hit you around last night, Like, you have to all work together to get the food. Cats don't have to do that. Well, cats do. Domestic cats don't have to do that.
Yeah, right.
Because domestic cats get fed. They don't have to work for their food, so they can hate people all they like.
So there's obviously something at play there, the human interaction aspect of that being that perhaps has put some of that on
possibly
to the cat?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean...
How much of that is like environmental sort of changes and intermingling animals and species and things like that? Is that something else that affects evolution? Just sort of purely like gauging
environmental change?
Yeah, and like developing based on another being's
interaction kind of?
Yeah, and tendencies and actions, I suppose. Is that something that can play a part?
Yeah, definitely.
Just in how they move? Because like you
100%.
see that between like domestic cats and dogs, like often you'll see like animals sort of mimic each other in a way.
Yeah.
Sort of,
I mean, there's two sort of forms of that. Like you can have a cat raised around dogs and it will act like a dog, and that's nothing to do with evolution. That's kind of like a instinctual side of the cat when it's really young. So when you're a baby cat, you know, you're looking at your mum to sort of teach you the ways of the cat, as you will, like how to clean yourself, all that sort of thing. So if they don't have that, you know, instructional, like authoritative figure kind of thing, then the next best thing, you know, the closest thing is a dog. They're going to learn from that because that's what is wired in their brain. Like they'll be able to do some things innately, but a lot of the behavioral stuff is learned from their mother.
Right.
Like children. If we were raised by wolves, we'd probably be a lot different.
Right.
You know? So there's that side of things. But then also like human influence and environmental factors are, you know, a massive side of evolution and behavioral stuff and all sorts of things. And there are like animals out there. Like, have you seen David Attenborough's series Planet Earth? And one of them was like cities.
I haven't watched the full thing. No.
Oh, you should. You should. It's good. It's so good. But cities is really interesting because it's all about these animals, some of which are just have adapted to cities around them and sort of live half in the wild, half in the cities, and others who live solely in cities, like pigeons. Pigeons have completely, essentially, adapted and changed to like living in an urban environment. Right. And stuff, which is crazy. It's kind of, well, it is on topic because it's about cities and pigeons. But another crazy thing that happened, it's in England, I think, in London, in the big like waterways. So lots of pigeons, they need a water source. They go to the river and they drink water from the river. There are catfish in that river, and pigeons have become a new sort of food source. The catfish, right? Because they figured out that they just sort of wait, like crocodiles essentially, they just kind of wait at the edge, and then all these pigeons come down and drink water, and then they sort of just lunge and flop onto the pigeons and eat them, take them down, which is fuck. Because if you're a bird, you're like, what? I mean, like, because birds eat fish and stuff. I'm like, the last thing you'd be worrying about as a pigeon is a giant fish coming out and eating
because you should be able to fly away, right?
Yeah,
no,
I know.
I gotcha.
So now they've got that new predator, which sucks.
But they're like pigeons in particular are quite would you say they're sort of like a useless sort of being now, because like they, through this like living through a city landscape, like sort of, well, maybe not useless, but like they're quite unique in the bird world, right? Like how pigeons sort of interact. Carry on with these cities talks. So we'll
no, you're right. And I think a lot of people dislike pigeons and dislike seagulls too. It's really interesting, right? And this is like an interesting point of science communication, actually, because I always think it's funny that people really like animals until they come into their territory. Yeah. You know, so like people think that like I don't know, what's a cool bird? Okay, people like penguins, right? They're like, fuck yeah, penguins are sick. Yeah. They're weird, they waddle around, they make strange sounds. I guarantee you, if penguins started like coming up, nesting in gardens, fucking up people's like poppies and shit, and like coming in houses, different story. 100%. They'd suddenly become the seagulls of the the flightless world. I don't know.
There's a romanticized thing around animals in that sense, like right, they look cute, or you know, they've got features that appeal to me. I like this animal because it looks cool, or they do this particular thing that I find of interest, but they're over there. That's why you go to the zoo and look at it through the glass. You know,
because that's the sad thing, right? Is because like pigeons and seagulls are actually really interesting, right? And have plenty of cool aspects in their own right, and just as interesting actually as, you know, any other bird that you can think of. It's just we see them so much; they're so normalized.
Seagulls also, I think,
and very
just
loud.
in their nature, are just annoying. Yeah. So we don't really look at them as something that's, you know, fun or interesting.
Yeah,
you know?
It's unfortunate that they don't have like a Tui's call or something. They're all like but yeah, no, they're really interesting. And I had a train of thought for a second, but I forgot where I went.
We were talking about the city, the David Attenborough cities thing. Was there something you wanted to develop on?
I wanted to talk about how like animals are perceived differently based on like. Oh, that's right. Okay, so how we were just talking about like the fact that pigeons and seagulls are kind of like dissed because they're so common and you see them all the time. So when I was a kid, have you ever read Dragonology? Or Egyptology?
Yes, I actually have those books at my parents' house. Yes,
okay, as well. It's actually really a crack up because everyone who like ever comes to my room sees it and they're like, "Oh my god, I have that book!" And it's like, yeah, I think everyone secretly
They were
loves them.
super popular
They
at
were
one point in
fucking
time.
cool,
Yeah.
and to a degree, they're like a good representation of science communication. It's a fictional science. Well, I don't think it's a fictional science, but it's a fictional science.
Yeah.
If you don't think dragons are real, I don't know. I've yet to decide. But anyway, it's essentially formulated like a science book, right? It's all these dragons and stuff, and then they've set it up like where they breed, their habitat, like what they eat, and then like information about them, which is what you would find if you looked at a penguin book or something like that. And I remember sitting there being like, wow, this is amazing, this is so good. All the animals we have are shit. Like they're lame as fuck. They're nothing compared to a dragon. Like, and I went through this really depressive state when I was like 11, because I had loved animals, and now all of a sudden they were really boring and lame. And it was only until I got a bit older and I started learning more like about the obscure, weird animals that you just don't really talk about. Like there's this lizard that can shoot, I think it's like a 7-foot stream of blood from its eyeballs.
Oh god.
Yeah, because it was like coyotes or something eat it, and if you shoot the blood into their mouth, they don't like the taste, which seems counterintuitive because you would think that they would like the taste, seeing as though they're going to eat you, but like it
You're going to
works.
chew that thing up, you're going to get some of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but obviously, it evolved, so it must have
I
worked
guess it's
to
a
some degree.
sporadic thing as well. They're kind of like, what just came out
Yeah,
of
it's a
the thing?
surprise.
Yeah.
Like, like fuck. But and I learned about all these crazy animals, and I was like, this, they actually are really cool. So I'm like, why did I go through this phase where I thought that they were all boring? And it's just what happens when you see things sort of all the time. And I realized that if you lived in a world where there were dragons everywhere, and there were dragons in the cities, and there were dragons nesting in your gutters, and dragons ripping up your garden, they would be just as annoying and just as boring
exactly.
and just as used to it. And they'd be looking at a book of our dimension, like our world, being like, fucking hell, pigeons are so cool.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell?
That's so true. It's just what's in front of you all the time. You
it's
just become numb to, right? And then the fantasy involved in these other creatures that could or would have existed is obviously fascinating.
Yeah, which is sad. And so one of my goals in life at some point, hopefully utilizing my ability to sort of draw somewhat well, is I wanted to make a book that was like Dragonology, but used actual animals that we have, but describe them in a way that they're these sort of mythical, amazing animals, because they are. Like so everything would be true, but it would just be exciting, and I'd have like little bits of fur or stuff, exactly how they do it in Dragonology, and make it a really exciting thing. And then at the end, kind of reveal that like actually they're out there, they're all around. Like you can actually find them. You are like, congratulations, you get to be in the fantastic fantasy world this time. Like it's yours.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And just I'm just keep hitting the microphone.
That's
sorry.
okay.
And
You
just
can push it back a wee bit if you want to.
Oh, so yeah, I'm just excited. Just getting in its grill. But yeah, and I always thought that'd be like a cool thing to have, because I kind of wish I had that as a kid. Because I can't imagine how excited I would have been if I'd read a book like that and then found out that they were actually dragons. That would have
Absolutely.
been very, very
And
cool.
there's been attempts at that, right? Like there's definitely some fascinating books you can get about animals, and there's definitely like quirky facts that you can find out about things. It's just, I guess, having to sort of go and find that thing is I guess, the sort of difference there.
Yeah.
Well, this is a really good transition into another thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was your artwork. So you've just had an exhibition at Kiki. This was last week, wasn't it? How, well, I guess before we sort of get into the exhibition itself, like you're obviously sort of finding that pathway to creating this book. Can I correctly assume that?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
So is this the exhibition is based around toads and frogs, or just toads?
Toads and frogs, yeah. But Ode to Toad sounded cool. I didn't want to ruin it with Ode to Toad and frogs.
That they are involved. Well, that's really cool. So this is obviously, I guess, your starting point. This particular animal is something that has been of enough interest into you that you feel the need to document them first. What sort of, I guess, is it about them that interested you, or like why is this the animal you chose in this scenario? Is it something that's just fun for you to draw? Like how did you start off with this concept?
So honestly, I actually like. I kind of wish I had chose them purely on interest, but it actually started from how fun it was to draw them, and then evolved into learning more about them, being like, whoa, what the fuck?
So what is this thing that I'm drawing that's on this?
Yeah,
animal?
exactly. Well, actually, so I had a lecturer, Phil Bishop, who unfortunately has passed away now, but he, to anyone who did zoology and anyone who's interested in biology or frogs, was like a very cool guy.
Yeah.
And in his lectures, he used to do like a frog of the day or toad of the day and have a little clip. It's fucking
That's so cool.
And they were always amazing. I mean, the diversity in toads and frogs is insane. Like there's like a Vietnamese moss frog. I don't know. It's a frog that looks like a clump of moss. Clump of moss. Very amazing and beautiful. There's frogs that look like leaves. There's toads that they lay the eggs in their back skin and then they hatch from their backs and come out of them like little aliens. In some way, there's like flat toads. There's cane toads. There's toads that you lick and then you hallucinate. There's toads that dogs lick, which I'm pretty sure it was cane toads. They found that dogs were licking them and then hallucinating.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if the dog was doing that to hallucinate. It may have been an accident, but yeah, crazy shit. There's all sorts. There's bullfrogs that are like super aggressive, but then like really good mothers and stuff. There's this frog that it lives in the trees in like Africa in some weird tree, and so most frogs go into a water source and lay their eggs and stuff, so that the eggs don't dehydrate and stuff because how the egg is formed, like it doesn't have a calcium shell to keep it protected from dehydration and stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, usually they go into the water and they lay them. These guys have figured out that they can do it in a tree if it's above a water source, which is good because it keeps it away from predators. And they essentially mate by the female will like produce a sort of foam and then mix it up with her back legs and create this enormous foam net.
I've seen this, actually.
Definitely been on some documentaries, yeah. So it's like a giant bubble bath foam pit in a tree, and then all the males just sort of like chuck their sperm places and hope to fertilize something. And then, all these eggs are like in this sort of sticky foam casing. And then once they hatch, they sort of wriggle out and drop into the water below, which is crazy. I lost was I just explaining frogs excitedly because I was talking? Yeah. So I found out like cool stuff about them later. But no, I started drawing them because I really like to draw like texture. Mm-hmm. It's like a fun thing. And I haven't really figured out fur yet, and feathers are also hard. But just like little dots and little knobbly bits and little circles and like that kind of thing is just super fun. And also, toads just have a lot of attitude. They're just grumpy. And like
they seem that way.
Yeah, great expressions, and they're just really fun. And so I just sort of drew one. I drew a cane toad first, which I like to think, even though they're not the OG toad, it just kind of feels like the OG toad.
Sure.
Like when you think of a toad, you think of a cane toad.
Right.
And I drew that, and I was like, this is great. This is sick. And then so I just kind of kept drawing them. And at that point, I had no intention to do a show. I just liked drawing heaps of toads and frogs. And after like my fifth one, I suddenly realized that for once in my life, I was kind of drawing within a theme. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's a good opportunity to have a show because I could do a theme. And then I was like, toads, ode to toad. And I'm like, it is like an ode to toad because it's all about toads. So I just kind of expanded on that. It was sort of like just in the back of my head. I was like, oh, maybe I'll do that. And then I actually talked to Kiki ages ago, didn't get an email back. So I was like, okay, I guess I, won't do a show. And because like a show's always been an interesting thing in my eyes as well, because I've always associated it with artists. And I wouldn't consider myself an artist. I feel like, and whether people would argue or not, I think just because I draw with pens and stuff, I've always sort of thought like if I could amount to anything, it would be an illustrator. Yeah. Because my interpretation of art was always it had to be some sort of like meaningful depth into it, some sort of like non-obvious truth, like it's a little bit metaphorical or something like that, or like you choose certain colors or shapes to convey some sort of idea or message or feeling. Yeah. That's what I always thought art was. Whether I was just drawing toads because I thought it was a cool toad, But I don't know if I seem to think that about myself. But I think if I saw someone else doing a show on toads and they just drew them because they like toads, I'd probably be like,
well, that's exactly it, right? I think whatever you create in that sense, whatever you make is always going to be art. It's just defining yourself as an artist is the tricky bit. Finally getting to a point where you're like, okay, I'm an artist. That's the bridge, right? That's like it's always art until you realize in yourself that you are the artist, or putting that label on yourself. Like I still don't really feel right saying that I'm an artist. But I am. Like, I make art, you know?
I'd be like, oh yeah, you're an artist.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Like, so it's getting to that point where you're like, okay, I am an artist and it is art. Though it always has been, sort of like internalizing that within yourself and saying that that's what I do is the tricky leap to make. But it's definitely like art what you do. And I really like sort of the more you've been explaining it, the more I'm thinking about what you can do. And this might be ideas that you already have, but I would love the concept of doing you obviously want to get to a point where you've got this book of yours and you've presented ideas in a certain way, and you've got drawings and illustrations to go along with that thing. I would love to see something like what you've done at Kiki, where you've got all your works displayed, and I love the little captions that you had under each work. Thanks. Because aside from just looking at the picture, let's just say picture, to further engage with that piece, you have the other little quirky bit, and I couldn't help but sort of smile at every one that you had there, because it was just something else that you learn about the in this case animal, and it just excites you more about the work because you sort of go back and forth. It would be really cool to see something like that, do sort of what you've done, and then have like the book there, or like have something that you can take away from that. So it's like it's combining sort of an author with an artist within yourself, being able to sort of further that experience. Like, oh, well, that's really interesting that they do that. I quite like that toad. How can I like learn more about it, I suppose? And then you've got more of your content to sort of go. Is that something you've sort of thought about? Like,
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. And yeah, no, well, that's it. That's like exactly. So I did all these frogs, and I always sort of wanted, because that is a form of science communication.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah, exactly.
Like, to avoid going on and on about it, but it's exciting. There's so many different ways that you can communicate different sciences, and it doesn't have to be like a hectic science. It can just be like a chill one. But I wanted, if I was going, because I normally don't draw things that are actually real. This was the first time also that I drew things that exist in the world. So I wanted to like convey the fact that these things are just as exciting as like the weird shit that I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to have these like little things that people could like learn something, and they could come and even if they, didn't take a piece home with them and stuff, because like money, right? It's hard. And all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's not half the reason I had the show, but anything that I sell is a big help. That sounds like advertising.
It's true. No, I get what you're saying.
Anyway, like even if you can't take something home with you, you can take home like a little bit of information, or like a little fun fact. Like you now know different things, and it was also a way for me to like test out my style of communication to see how it would go. Yeah. So honestly, more importantly than selling any of the art or anything like that, it was kind of like my debut to see what I could do as a science communicator that had used a lot of visual sort of stuff. Like I wanted to see whether people did get excited about the sort of style that I have, but that describes actual animals, because that's with this book that I sort of describing. Like eventually I'd love to do that, and I need an art style that people will engage in and think is interesting and cool, and also different to like what else is kind of out there, I guess, because like it's not a scientific representation of it, but it's close-ish. You can recognize the animal.
But you're bridging the gap, I guess, is the point, right? Like you're sort of breaking the barrier between art and then
science.
Yeah. I guess that's the word. I was sort of going to say like what you would typically see when you look up something. Typically how the information is presented when you want to find out about
like an actual
something.
Scientific textbook.
So it's like it's you're pulling people in with the intrigue of the art, and then you're educating people sort of without them even knowing. That was the other thing. I was like little fun fact that's just there, and you like it pulls you in more. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you said that you did like the captions, because in a way I was almost more worried about how the captions would go, because I wrote them very casually. Like I wrote them how I would say it to someone. Like for example, when I was trying to describe the red-eyed tree frog, obviously I only do black and white, so I was like, fuck, well, it says red-eyed, like, that's like the key feature. I was like, how can I describe what this is? And then I just thought of the fact that when, like, I don't know if you guys ever do this, when you just close your eyes and you'll look at different areas of light. So like you look at a light bulb and it's bright red, and you look at somewhere dark and it goes black, and like all sorts of stuff. And I was like, I can describe it like that. And like even the frog that didn't exist, like the Beelzebub toad, being in like the 4,953rd pit, or like fiery pit, and sometimes they spill into the next one, and like stuff like that. Like I wanted to be sort of true to myself, and that is kind of the vibe I would want to do a little book. Like I want it to be kind of silly and kind of not super serious, but also like factual and like interesting. So this is kind of an experiment, I guess, to see whether people do smile at that, and whether they do think that that's cool, and like that could be something that I could kind of go down. So. Yeah,
absolutely. And with a show like that, you're not always going to get that feedback immediately. That definitely at least worked for me, and I think sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes is to sort of like just go based off that, like, oh well, you know, it resonated with someone, so that's reason to sort of continue that thing. But often you won't sort of get that raw sort of feedback, especially in an art exhibition space, and not to bat Kiki or anything, but I find that space can be quite tricky to really engage with the work, because as much as I really wanted to sort of linger with a piece that was there,
it's small,
and there's people sitting there. It was hard. It's hard. I felt awkward, sort of almost standing there, like, sorry, just gonna look at the work here. But I did manage to take in everything. But it's, you know, you want sort of a space where there is room to move in and communicate sort of separately, and not a lot of people will engage too much with you, or at least imagine like how much conversation you would have on an opening night around points that are sort of addressed to you. You know, you can't have that conversation with everyone because there's not enough time, and also, you know, so you're only going to get little sort of bits of feedback, or people just going, that was really cool, like, you know, just that little bit of encouragement. You know, which is obviously amazing. Again, that's what you want from an opening, but like to get that sort of raw feedback, or that genuine sort of like, I like the concept because I like this because, you know, that's harder to get sometimes, I find. Yeah, no, and I guess in that way, I was also really glad that I had the description so that people could learn something about it. Because you're right, it was like, I would have loved if it was a much more open space, and I could have actually like lingered around different pieces, so if anyone wanted to say anything or ask questions, like I could have talked more about it, and it would have been more opportunity to talk about sort of, you know, my art style and where I want to go, but also the things in the pictures, like the frogs and toads themselves would have been really, really interesting. But yeah, it is quite a small space, and unfortunately I also get overwhelmed quite easily when it comes to like lots of people. Absolutely. So it was very much me sort of like bouncing around the room constantly, chatting, but not really saying anything of any merit. So and that's fine. That's fine. There's like in your case, I think there's room for that, the way that the work's being presented. You know, there's an opportunity for someone to learn something or get that sort of human feel from looking at the piece without actually having the human there, as opposed to something where you would enter a gallery and there's no further development aside from what you only analyze the piece in your own mind. You know, you see a body of art, and especially if it's obscure or abstract, you know, like it's sort of, you're leaving it up to interpretation, and then those are the times that you probably do want to engage with the artist more, because you sort of want to get a better understanding of what they're trying to put forward. Or in your case, you're already sort of bridging that gap as well. You know, you're already sort of giving an idea around something without having to really communicate that, and you sort of get that instant gratification from looking at that piece. So the concept is really intriguing, and you just learn. People always like to learn something, right? And the fact that you're adding humor to it is already like you learn something without even sort of realizing, which I think is quite powerful as well. And it's almost like, let's sort of back to what I was brought up before, was just like how you can make things exciting. If you can make things exciting for people to learn, then they're usually inclined to learn more, or learn more without sort of recognizing it. And so I think it's pretty powerful what you're doing. And if you can sort of develop that into something like a book, like what you're saying, I think that's going to be something really valuable. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's cool. Like
cool.
it's cool to be able to talk about someone else's work, and like, you know, you might already have an idea about what it is that you're doing, but to have someone else sort of like say that or take it further or in a different direction, or sort of analyze something that you may not have sort of recognized before. It can, not to say that I'm the one that's giving you that, but you know, it's important to be able to discuss what you do. But yeah, it was really cool. I hope to see more of what you do in that field. But this is reasonably unique in what you have done. Like, at least the work that I've seen from you sort of in the past has been more figurative stuff, right? Sort of based around a character. So how are you still sort of doing that sort of stuff, I suppose?
I mean, yeah, like drawing. This is the fickle thing about my drawing sort of thing. It's like a few people have asked me if I'm going to do another show, which is very flattering. And like, I definitely want to at some point. But the reason why I did this show is because I just happened to enjoy drawing toads and frogs. And then I was like, I could do a show.
Yeah.
And then I put one on. So like, drawing for me is just constantly sort of going. Like, I'm always doing something. And I like to sort of, everything's still within my sort of style, but I like to switch up styles all the time. So the frogs and toads probably are a rare thing for me. Like I was saying, the fact that they're real. Most of the time it is, weird humanoid forms or like strange things. And I would definitely like to sort of showcase more of that like abstract weird stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Like, drawing has always been like an outlet for me. Like, I did it in high school and then almost hated it forever in like year 12, because it's just like a high pressure environment. You know, you sort of, you're restricted to doing a particular theme. Even if you choose the theme, I easily get bored of the theme halfway through the year, and then you're doing something that you don't like. And there's so much like pressure and stuff, and you're being graded, which is also, you know, troublesome because it's art, so it's subjective. So it's like, if your teacher doesn't like your style, then you're fucked. So high school art, high school art was just not a good time, and I didn't do it in year 13. And I think my parents sort of thought that was the avenue I'd kind of go down. Like, I'd want to do art post high school, but it kind of ruined it for me in high school. But I think that was a good thing, because I think if I had done art as like my main thing, I would have like lost the interest, and it would have lost its sort of therapeutic qualities, I guess. Like, I usually draw when I'm feeling a very strong emotion, or something like that, or if I just see something cool and an inspiration, I want to draw about it. And that's why I like have so much respect for anyone such as yourself that can do like consistently put out so much art, and it's always like interesting and diverse and like cool, and it always has the same amount of like effort and sort of feeling put into it. Because I don't, and maybe that's just like, even though I'm passionate about it, I lack the sort of true, like, intense passion that maybe I have for science and science communication. Even though I love art, it's not the same quantity kind of thing. And I think, it's like, I will always draw, definitely always draw. And I definitely want to use drawing within science and stuff. But I struggle to like do consistent artwork and stuff, like, and I think that's why I would call you an artist without hesitation, and why I'd call like other people that I know artists without hesitation, but I would hesitate with me, because I feel like an artist is someone is like, this is, you know, a really important aspect of their life, and they put so much effort and so much time and into it, and they're producing, you know, amazing stuff and improving constantly all the time because they're putting so much effort into it. I mean, there's other aspects that make someone an artist, obviously, but
yeah. I think I would agree with that sentiment, but I also think that it doesn't have to be that deep, you know. I think that anything that you make, whether there's time and effort or emotion gone into that thing, is something that you've made and can be considered as art, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be displayed. I think it's just self-reflection and self-analysis about, you know, if you're sort of just entering the art world, it's hard to put that label on yourself, and it would be pretentious of you to say you draw one picture and go, "Oh, I'm an artist now," and go around prancing around telling people you're an artist. You know, so that's kind of exactly. But that's the worry, and what you will typically just avoid when you start producing work is that like, oh, I'm not an artist yet, because an artist has big paintings in galleries, you know, that's sort of like a perception that you might have of what an artist is, or, you know, when you read about someone's work, it's always from a place that's dark, or, you know, not always, but, you know, there's usually some sort of story, or, you know, like you say, it's an outlet of yours. It's something that you do because you're feeling a certain way. I don't think that always has to be what it's about, you know. It's just like, oh, I drew some pictures, these look quite cool together, I'd feel like I want to display those. Like that's definitely like an artist mindset, you know.
This is true. I completely agree with you. I feel like maybe we're like just a little bit of imposter syndrome, possibly.
Yeah, sure.
And I think maybe a lot of people get that. I guess, I don't know. Yeah, because I'm afraid to sort of to claim the artist title. Yeah. I look for any avenue to explain why I don't fit that.
Yeah. But also you don't even have to give that label to yourself.
Yeah.
Others will do it for you, you know. When are you ever going to say, like, I guess unless you're not going to have an exhibition and have like a bio and say, you know, no, I was an artist from Dunedin, you know, like you're not going to write that. You're just going to say, this is my work, you know, and then others will say, oh, you know, no, as an artist, you should see her work, you know, like it's sort of, it will do it on its own terms. I've never had to say, well, I suppose that's not true. I've definitely said to people like, oh, I'm an artist, but I don't often say I'm an artist. I'll say I'm a painter. You know, I paint,
I say,
you know?
I'm a drawer.
Exactly, because that sort of leaves that, because the artist title can sound pretentious as well. It's kind of like, oh, you're an artist.
It's interesting because it's I'm realizing as we talk about it, it's the same way I view skating, for example. Because like when I started skating, I was like, well, I'm not a skater, because if you're like, I thought that you had to at least be able to, this sounds stupid now that I'm saying it, but I thought you had to at least be able to do like a kickflip. Yeah, sure. Then you're a skater. Then you get the title. Yeah. But like it's been like 3 years now, I guess. I still got into a kickflip. But like I've been skating the whole time. Like I would assume that means like, yeah, I guess, you know, I'm a skater because I skate, because you skateboard. Yeah, right. That's the thing. Like when you were saying before, like you're completely right. In the most basic terms, if you produce art, you're an artist, because that's like the definition of it. Yeah. But it's just so much stigma around it, and obviously so much opinion, and much like in the art community and the skate community as well, you'll get people who are kind of like, oh, you're not a skater, or you're because you can't do such, and you're an artist, and you're not an artist because you haven't had a show in a gallery, or you don't have paintings everywhere, or something like that.
I think there's always going to be those people within a demographic that will have that attitude. I think perhaps, you know, actually I was about to say that the skater is probably one of those more communities that it's like, oh, you're not a skater, like, because you can't do this and that. But the more that I've sort of been
talking to them,
talking to people, hanging out with people, going to the skate park, not that I do anymore, but like times that I have, I used to be so intimidated at the skate park because I didn't want to go there and then like try and do an ollie and fail and then be laughed and pointed at, oh, you can't do this, you know. It's just not a thing. Like everyone's usually always accepting, but I always had this sort of like stigma, I suppose, that's what was going to happen, is that you couldn't do this or that, then you'd be looked at funny. And I do believe that it's still there for the most part. Like you see some pretty nasty comments on Instagram of people posting skate pics and like, this isn't real skating, or whatever it is, you know, that's still prevalent. But I'm not sure I was heading with that, but you know, it's another one of those things when compared to the art world. It's like, I don't know if I could speak for the skating side of things, but I feel like when you're a skater, there's usually, I don't know. I feel like if you're just riding your skateboard from A to B, like if you're just going to work on your skateboard, are you a skater?
Well, and this is the question, because like the true definition of it would be like, I mean, you ride a skateboard, so you're a skater.
Seems that way, right?
I think the skating community, whether they'd ever say it, I think most people sort of, the agreement is that you have to do something, at least one other thing other than just riding A to B, and then maybe. But it's interesting because Dunedin in itself, the Dunedin skate community is pretty good, like in terms of being like supportive and stuff for people. And I have yet to find the source of where that what you're just talking about, that sort of like fear of humiliation and stuff comes from, and that stigma, like it's definitely around. I've definitely seen it on the internet, and I have definitely felt it. I mean, when I started out, like my flatmate at the time sort of skated with me, but she just sort of skated A to B with me, going to the skate park where I was like by myself, and like I had the whole, I didn't know how to do anything. I was starting out, but I also the fact that I was a girl, and like there's heaps of girl skaters now, which is so sick. It's so good. But at the time, I sound like I'm like back in my day, but there was definitely less, or at least I didn't sort of see them around.
There is a recent uprise of female skaters.
Definitely.
So it is, yeah.
And like I thought, I felt all this pressure that I had to improve 20 times faster than any guy. Like I had to be good immediately because people already assumed that I was bad because I was like a woman skating. And I think that there's definitely a reason for me thinking that in the world, and like I've seen it online, and I've heard people's opinions. It's funny because most of the opinions that I've heard that sort of from don't skate. Like because gradually I got to know the people who were skating at the park and stuff, and they were all really nice. Or you know, some of them maybe not so nice, but all of them, no one had a problem with me skating, and no one had a problem with people skating as a beginner. I think the only time there's ever a problem is if they get in the way too much. People. But like as I sort of got used to the park and skated more, and I would start to see people who are starting out who I'd become slightly better than, as in I can just go down a ramp and they couldn't. Not like hectic, but I found like never once did I find myself being like, they're not very good. They suck. Ha 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 ha. They just fell off the board. How pathetic. I was always like, oh shit, they fell off, you're good. Or like, sick. Someone's starting out. Mean. I remember what that was like. And I think that's what everyone does.
I think it's the natural human sort of like reaction. Right?
Because every skater, if there is a skater that's good, then they've been bad. And I think if ever a skater is arrogant enough to diss someone for trying, then you can be like, fuck you sucked at 1.2.
Exactly.
Like,
it's ridiculous to think that just because you started something when you were younger and you're good now, sort of like at a younger age,
you have
doesn't
the right
mean
to
that,
like diss people.
Exactly. Because like no one comes out the gate doing tray flips.
Exactly.
You have to start somewhere.
Exactly. So yeah, it's been an interesting one. And even though I know that, I still definitely get a lot of anxiety about going, you know. And you still feel pressure, especially if you're at the park and there's like a lot of people doing some cool stuff. You feel like you need to at least look like you're attempting something hard in order to like feel okay. And it's been a hard time just to convince myself that it's okay. Even if you're taking turns with really skilled skaters doing like little loops around the park, it's all good just to like go really fast if you want to go fast, and just go up and down the ramps and not do anything particularly special, because sometimes that's all I want to do, because to be quite honest, my favorite thing about skating is just kind of going fast.
Absolutely.
I like the speed. But yeah, like I just like skating around, and I like going down the ramps, and that's fun, and I do try out other tricks and stuff, but like, you know, I'm having a good time.
Well, that's it, right? And no one should bet you for that.
Yeah, and exactly. That's the main thing. You should never be trying to progress for any other reason other than you're enjoying it and you want to improve.
Absolutely, and you'll pass the point of that intimidation factor where you become sort of a regular at the park, and then you don't worry about who else is there anymore, and no one's really looking at you funny anymore, and you can just sort of go for it. But I must admit, I still have that. Like, even if after I'd been to the skate park a couple of times, I did have that mindset where I'm like, oh, no one actually cares anymore, and I can just fuck around. I still have like I'm being watched, and I can't actually skate very well, so I'm not performing as well. Like, I can usually ollie whenever, but when I was at the park, I just couldn't do it. And I was like, oh god, this isn't actually good for me. Like for skating, kind of ironically.
Stressful. No, and like even though I sort of say all this, and like I at one point did get to a place where I was pretty comfortable at the park, but like I haven't, like, since going back to uni kind of thing, I have been way less. Like I haven't been to the park in a long time, and every time I go back after a bout of not going, it's always terrifying. And there's always new people who have shown up, and they're new but good, and you're
Yeah.
like, ah.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's okay. Like I remember the last time I went, I was really nervous. I went by myself, and I ended up making like a bunch of friends with people, which never happens.
Yeah,
'Cause
right.
not really, like, I mean, people do talk at the skate park, but usually you go there with pre-made friends, or you
Yeah,
just kind of
sure.
skate by yourself. But yeah, it was really, really nice and wholesome, and like it sort of reminded me, like, you know, it is theoretically a community, and it's a bunch of people who are doing the same thing that you really like. So there's a pretty good chance you're gonna get along with them.
Exactly.
You know, so
Makes sense, right?
why would you diss the others who like the same things as you, or why would you think that other people would want to diss you for doing the same thing that they're doing? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
it seems kind of absurd,
Yeah.
but I still get anxious. So
Yeah, well, it's natural, right? And I think being on the skateboard, there's sort of the anxiety of just like, even if it's not a social anxiety, it's just like, I might fall. You know, you still sort of get jittery and tense in certain environments anyway. It's sort of like one of those things, like it's almost built to make you fail, you know, like it's just inevitable. You'll sort of end up at a point of anxiety, but I think what, you know, will make you prevail is just your consistency and your attitude towards that task. You know, if you continue to go out and skate and you're improving, then it's like, that'll all subside, you know, and you're just sort of part of it, which it sounds like you're sort of there anyway now, which is fun.
Yeah.
But that's cool that you're still skating. Like,
yeah,
I hadn't really I sort of forgotten that part of it until you
Yeah,
brought it
no.
up. I was like, oh yeah, right, sick, the skating, that's cool.
so, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I've not been skating very often, so
Yeah.
I do not blame you. But I'm trying to get back into it.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
It's something I've always loved. Like, I would say, if I've been interested in anything my whole life, it's been skateboarding. I've just never been able to improve, or never really seriously committed my time to getting better at skating, unfortunately. And I do wish I'd done it when I was younger and sort of be at a better position now, but it's just something I never really grasped, but I just love watching it. And I love the culture around it, and it's just everything I do, like whether I think about it or not, there's skating in my life some way, shape or form. Like I have skateboards, I watch skate clips, I freaking fingerboard. Like there's always something involved in the skating world for me. I've got a game on my phone that's like skateboarding. Like I'm always defaulting to like a skateboarding thing, but I've just never able to get good at it. And I again just never really put the time forward. I think one thing that didn't help me was just not having a group of friends that skated. I feel like it was always just me, and so that really
Definitely
didn't help.
More fun with people.
Going out for a skate by yourself is kind of depressing if you can't really do much. You know, you want to improve. Like if you can't really even go to the skate park and do anything, like you got to find somewhere else obscure and usually out of the public eye, at least for me, to go do it. And so that inevitably just stopped it altogether. I was like, oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want people to see me skating, you know?
Yeah, no, that's
which is
fair.
ridiculous, but it's how it is.
I always think it's like it's only so much that I like. Say you're trying to get a trick and it's just you. To a degree, I can be like, "Come on, do it again, like, do it again." But then eventually, I'm like, "Oh, I'm tired," and I'll be like, "Yeah, I agree, body. Let's go home," and then we'll just leave. Like
Exactly.
after 20 minutes. Whereas if it's someone else, sometimes you need like a little bit of judgment. You need like a little bit of that anxiety to be like, "No, you got to keep going." You gotta get this.
And it's even like, and even if you do get the trick, you and yourself are like, "Oh, I got it." Oh, no one saw it. You know, like that's the best part of skating is having your friends go, "Oh shit!
Oh my god, you actually got it!" Yeah, and because then if you're like next time you're with someone, be like, "Oh, I got this trick," and they'll be like, "Oh, let's see it then." And then you can't do it, and you're like, "Fuck." Yeah. So.
Classic.
It is a whole run.
I don't know. That's the physical aspect of skating too. Is, you know, it can be what stops you. Like I can make art all I want because it's not physically enduring. Whereas skating, you have to commit a time to go out and get a bit tuck it out. Like skating, you know, and do that consistently can take quite a toll on you as well. But it's still
There's
fun.
also the fear of sort of cracking your head open or something. That always gets in the way a little bit.
Yeah, I never got past the fear of just falling on a skateboard. Like I still have that now, and that it would always stop me from doing anything further because I never had the big fall to be like, okay, that's what that feels like, and now I can keep going. You know?
Yeah, like I've fallen in every way, shape, or form apart from. Oh, actually, no, I've kind of hit my head a little bit, but not like massively. Like I've probably my worst one. I was like at Mornington. I think it's Mornington. It might not be. If I'm wrong, forgive me. But it's like a spine. I think it's called Spine, and it's like fuck. But someone who's been skating for a while, I have terrible knowledge of the terminology.
Two ramps and intersecting the spine.
Yeah, and it goes in and then goes really steep upwards. And I was like, not even doing anything cool or not even trying anything cool. I was just doing kick turns. I was just like going up, turning back around, going up, turning back around, just practicing.
Yeah.
And I was with Nina. And she was like, oh, should we go? And I was like, yeah, we'll go. I'm just going to do one more. This is always how it goes.
Yep.
If you're ever about to leave and you think, I'll do one more, don't do it. Don't do it.
You die.
You always get hurt. But anyway, so, I was like, I'll do one more. And I went in and I went way faster than I'd been doing previously. And I kicked it and went right up to the top. And then my board got like stuck on the coping.
Ooh.
So I just came back off my board and somehow landed. You know when football players are running and they do that big knee slide?
Sure.
I landed just on my knees, just like crack on the ground from like, I swear, like a meter off the ground.
Still a lot though in that capacity.
It fucking hurt. Yeah. And somehow I did not break my knees because I didn't move for a while because I thought I had. But I had like swollen, just purple knees for like 3 weeks.
That would have stopped you from skating for a while.
Well, it didn't actually. I kind of just kept going, but it's fine. But yeah, I've sort of hurt myself so many times in different variations of my body that it's okay, but I haven't gone to the point where you like break a bone or you hit your head really badly. I'm scared to do that because I'm scared that will put me off skating.
Yeah.
Because I don't want my head to be fucked up.
Yeah, and it's pretty gnarly. Like the concept alone of just having like a flat, skinny board under your feet with wheels on it. You know,
it's kind of asking for it.
I was going to say that's exactly it. Like it'll happen eventually. Something that's going to slide out of you, or it's going to get caught on something. Like it's going to happen. I think that's part of growing as a skater, right? And becoming a skater, as we say, is to crash and burn a few times before you get something good.
Yeah, and they're always like, especially so if you're just skating A to B and you fall, they're always embarrassing. Like the amount of times you do like the run where you run but you're just not quick enough to keep up with the momentum, and then you either fall and kind of do that sort of scorpion thing or you power slide. And I've ripped my fair share of pants and slice over my knees. I think every skater will have like that real crusty looking knees.
Yeah, for sure.
From doing that.
It's inevitable. I never wanted to do the downhill thing. Or like never, I was like, that really opens up the door for like injury and just hurting yourself a lot. And I kind of like the going fast thing too, but I was never that comfortable on the board that going at such high speed. Like I never really learned how to like stop properly, even just with your tail, just like putting that down and like sliding on that. It was always a foot on the ground kind of stop, which is not good when you're going like really fast speeds. Number one, not good for your shoes. Number two, like your balance sort of gets thrown off and just it's not ideal. So I never really attempted that, or would start and be like, nope. Just start running and pick it up again.
No, to be fair, like, because I don't do hell bombs either, for a reason which I'll say in a second. But when I mean going fast, I guess it's just like as fast as I can push.
Yeah, of course.
I like that aspect because it's like, you're the one getting yourself fast, which is cool.
And you're eventually going to slow down.
Yeah, you're still in control. Because I remember there was like, do you know York Place?
Yes.
It doesn't really matter. It's a steep hill. I'm not stupid enough to go up to the top because I also do not really know how to stop. So I'm like, well, I don't know I should probably learn how to stop first. I'm going to try that, or at least how to power slide to slow down. But I was just sort of like, learning. So I was like, I'll just start near the bottom. It'll be fine. And I'd done it so many times. And it was just one day I was going to see Ezra because I think we're going to watch a movie, and I had my laptop in my backpack. Oh, no. And I was really tired. I think maybe there was we'd gone out the night before. I don't know. I was really tired. I remember just being really tired. And for some reason, I was like, instead of just putting the board down and standing on it and going, I'm going to run and drop it.
Oh, dear.
So I ran and dropped it, got on perfectly fine. But the difference in speed between just putting the board on the ground and then pushing and then doing the run and drop is substantial.
Yeah.
So I started off from where I normally go way faster, and I just gained so much speed. And in a split second, I was going really fast. And then, I have one, I'm tired, so my decision making is not great. And two, I have a heavy backpack, which is like being a weird counterweight to one side. And I honestly, I don't know what happened. I essentially like turned, and as I turned, you know when like, that split second before you fall, you're like, oh, like, fuck. And I like turned, and I realized that was gonna happen, and my whole body was just. I think I was just. This is why I know that I was tired, because I was just like, well,
okay, that's happening.
and just like flop, and I just fell to the side, and like I hit my head a little bit, but I was lucky because I think most of my backpack sort of took the fall, and I smacked onto the ground and slid and kind of rolled, and my board like smacked into a car on the side.
Yikes!
And it was not good. And I sort of had to get up and sit on the side of the pavement for a little while and make sure that I was okay.
Yeah.
And I like had blood all up my arm and all that good stuff. And then I was like, fuck. But then I was like, oh, I better keep going. Got to get to Edges to watch this film. So I got back on my board and then skated there and got to his house. And I was already a bit shaken and I was, bleeding through my clothes. And I get there, he's like, oh my God, like, are you good the fuck? I'm like, don't want to talk about it. I just want to watch this fucking movie. And I set my laptop up, open it, screen's fucked.
Yeah.
I had broken my entire laptop. And I was just like, he's like, you all good? I'm going home. Like,
skate time.
yeah. Literally, I was like, ah. So I have not hell bombed since.
No, fair enough. God, that's just a recipe for a disaster from the get-go.
Yeah, don't skate with your laptop. It's just stupid.
Not
or at least
ideal.
put it in like a protective case. It was just like in my bag rattling around. It was so stupid.
Crack. Oh, funny. Yeah. But no, this was really fun. I really enjoyed you coming on here. I learned a lot. You're a really interesting person to talk to. You're very, very fascinated about all the things that you do, which is really cool. Makes me excited about the stuff that you do. So this was really fun. I really want to develop a wee bit more and sometime in the future about all these things that we talk about. This is really interesting. So thanks for coming here.
Thanks
spending your time.
me.
This is really cool. Your exhibition, is that still on? Can people still go see that?
Yep. It should be on at least for a month. So until about the 23rd of August.
Awesome. Definitely go check that out at Kiki. They're open every day of the week, aren't they?
I think so.
So anytime, definitely go check that out. I think that's definitely worth seeing. Cool. So thanks again.
That's right.
Cheers now. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Home Audio Entertainment.
9016 Radio.
The show for artists of all kinds.
Sit down and relax. Enjoy the music.